What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, April 8th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 10-game NBA, or not NBA, MLB slate tonight. There's an NBA slate too. Don't know how many games. Don't care right now. 10-game MLB slate. Excited to be talking about that. Going to go through game by game as always. A little bit of a change on the screen. We do have our Run the Sims projections available now. So I am going to have them as the main thing on the screen. If I need to switch over and look at individual lineups, then I will switch over to the SaberSim screen. But a lot of good stuff here on the projections page. Obviously, you can see the player projections themselves, but also all of the stats that go into those projections too. So it'll answer some questions that pretty often come up during the show as far as, stolen base upside, stuff like that. Easier to answer home run picks as well when people ask those, and I have no answer prepared. I can pretty easily find answers to that now. So going to have this as the main screen and then switch over as needed if I need to. But other than that, show is going to be the same, still going through game by game, talking about my player exposures as things stand right now. And more importantly for you, just talking about what I see in each game, plays that I like, plays that I think look good, plays that maybe I think are too popular, don't look that good. So still going to be the same show, just a little bit different look. Just need to update one thing and I should be good to go. As far as following along, if you're watching this back, you can still see where I am by which game I have pulled up on the screen here. So you can see on the Run the Sims projections page, you have the game filter. You don't have, it doesn't show after I click it, but you can see over here which teams I'm talking about. So that's how I will be going through this slate, starting with the Angels taking on the Rays in Tampa Bay in the Yankees single A or whatever park it is. As far as exposures in this one, or I guess starting with the pitching matchup here for Tampa Bay, Shane Baz; for the Angels, Kyle Hendricks. One of those pitchers is much, much, much more talented than the other. Shane Baz projecting for 17 DraftKings points for us. Kyle Hendricks only projecting for about 11.5. Kyle Hendricks is showing up for me an alarming amount of the time, though, in my actual lineups, which I don't particularly like. Hopefully it changes before lock. He is projected for basically no ownership, so I'm guessing that that's why, but I don't like it. I certainly don't recommend it too heavily. You can see on the screen that it's not that we have him projected very well. This is not a spot where, I think Kyle Hendricks is a great point per dollar play, great projection play, anything like that. I think it's just the lack of ownership coming into him and the fact that he is really, really cheap. But, you can see here nothing that stands out, projected for less than 4 strikeouts, projected to work relatively deep into the game. 22 and a half total batters faced, not deep into the game, but, it's not for a $6,600 pitcher. It's not like he is expected to be super limited. We have him projected for like 15 plus outs, so basically 5 innings. But mostly, I think the reason I'm getting him is just the lack of ownership coming into him and the fact that he's cheap. So it will allow me to, have high upside lineups elsewhere and get good bats in those lineups. But also, hopefully that just changes before lock. Obviously, we're still pretty far away and things do tend to change. I would prefer that because Kyle Hendricks is obviously not a pitcher that I really want to have a lot of, especially on a 10-game slate where there are plenty of other good options to get to. As a starter since the beginning of last season, only a 16% strikeout percentage, 4.53 xFIP. Not the worst pitcher in the world, but certainly far from anybody that I would have confidence in. On the other side, Shane Baz getting 16% ownership. I'm only getting the 4%. Again, probably an ownership thing. And, I assume that at an $8,600 price tag, there are plenty of other pitchers that I can get to that, do have a similar range of outcomes. But ownership considerations aside, obviously would much rather be getting to Baz. 8,600, I think, is a perfectly fine price tag. You can see on the screen, we have him projected for 6 strikeouts, which is good. Projected to go 5 1/3, basically. 17 DraftKings points looks good at that price. He's the better point per dollar value compared to Hendricks, even at the more expensive price tag from a projection standpoint. So this is kind of one of those do as I say, not as I do type spots, I think. I'm certainly not going to recommend that people be jamming in Kyle Hendricks. I don't want to be, and I'm not really recommending people don't play Shane Baz. I think he looks good at this price. The matchup is fine. So I think this is a process thing for me, my personal process, how it factors in ownership, all of that, and an early in the day thing, more so than anything to do with the actual pitchers. Boz clearly looks like the better option of the two as far as chances of success. Offensively here, moving back over to the hitters, which I will have to get used to having to click that. Starting on the Tampa Bay side, Brandon Lau has the highest projection for Tampa Bay, followed by Diaz, Aranda, Caminero, the guys that you would expect here at the top of the order going up against Hendricks. As far as player exposures go, I'm not getting a ton. The field is getting to a bit more, like 13% projected ownership coming into Brandon Lau, 12% to Danny Jansen, 13% to Chris Morel, 16% to Caminero. So they are a relatively popular team, and maybe that is something that's driving up Kyle Hendricks for me as well. Just the fact that if Kyle Hendricks does somehow happen to pitch well, it is, knocking off 10 or so percent of the field that's going to be getting to Tampa Bay. You can see over here that you do have good point per dollar projections on them as well. So that is generally going to drive up ownership when you have pretty solid actual raw fantasy point projections. And then also their good point per dollar plays. It's going to be easy to stack them together, get good pitching around them, get good one-offs around them. And that's going to drive up, how popular they are in stacks and all of that. Yeah, this is kind of just a weird game to talk about. You get this a lot more, I think, in baseball than you do in basketball. Like usually in basketball, if I look at somebody and I'm like, oh, they're a good play, they're a good point per dollar play, whatever, I'm going to be getting to them because there's not as much volatility in basketball. Whereas baseball, like I can like everything about this. I like the matchup against Hendricks. I think he sucks. I like the Tampa Bay bats. I think a lot of them are good. They're cheap, but there's just so much variance in baseball when you're talking about hitters getting 4 or 5 plate appearances that you're very often going to be like, well, I hate all the shit that I'm playing or a lot of the stuff that I'm playing in large field tournaments specifically, but is what it is. So this is one of those games where it just really looks like the stuff that I would tell somebody to play with their money is very different than what it seems like I'm going to be playing with my money. So, kind of up to you how you want to approach lineups. But from a just how do things look standpoint, the Tampa Bay side here, both Boz and the bats look good. On the Angel side, I am getting to some Mike Trout, getting to some Rengifo. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, anytime you're getting to Mike Trout or Rengifo, I think that's fine. We have pretty high stolen base chances for Rengifo, also for Kyron Paris, but he's batting 7th. But Rengifo, at the top of the order, hitting 2nd, projects pretty well as far as stolen bases go. 4K price tag looks pretty good. Mike Trout obviously gives you a ton of upside. Highest home run percentage on the Angels, just behind Brandon Lau for the highest in the game, going up against a popular Boz. So you do get some negative correlation there. But offensively for me, I'm not getting tons of exposure to either side. The field is getting to more Tampa Bay though. And again, they project well. It's a good team to get to. You just have to balance the ownership considerations within your lineups. Choke Hold'em said, what made Robbie Ray a bad play last game? I looked at flashback and none of the sharps played him. I don't even remember what slate Robbie Ray was on. So I can't even really answer. Like I vaguely remember there being a Robbie Ray slate, and I don't even remember if I played a lot of him or not. I think I remember him not really pitching that well, but that's like the extent of anything that I remember. Probably it was just that in general with Robbie Ray, it's just that he's a really volatile pitcher, and he's normally at a price point where even though he's going to project well because he is a good strikeout pitcher, he has plenty of options around him as far as guys that have a similar range of outcomes. And he is wild enough. He does get himself in enough jams that there is a lot of volatility there that when he is popular, you can pivot away from. But outside of that, like I can't say anything specifically because I have no recollection at all of who he was facing, what the slate looked like, any of that stuff. Moving on to Philadelphia, taking on the Braves in Atlanta. Switch over to that game. We have Zach Wheeler going for the Phillies, Chris Sale for Atlanta. So 2 aces on the mound in this one. Zach Wheeler getting 17% ownership. Chris Sale getting 34% ownership. I'm not getting to either one in the lineups I built. So I'm starting to think that something might have just gone wrong, honestly, in my prep for the show, because I don't know why I would have neither of these guys. I mentioned it on a show yesterday. I have been a little bit more contrarian at pitcher this year so far than in years past, which is a change that I like. It's something I wanted to make. It didn't feel right that I was jamming chalk pitching quite as much as I was in the past, even though it is more projectable than hitters. There is still a lot of volatility there, but also the amount of just bad pitching that I appear to have on this slate makes me think that I may have done something wrong, but not important. More important than I just talk through what we're seeing. And you are seeing a lot of ownership come in here. Like I said, 34% to Sale, 17 to Wheeler. These are two of the best pitchers in baseball. They're two of the best pitchers on the slate, which goes without saying. Anytime that they're pitching, going back to the start of last season, Chris Sale striking out 31.8% of hitters, 2.68 xFIP. That is on this slate the highest strikeout percentage. The only pitchers going today that have a higher strikeout percentage than Sale since the start of last season are Garrett Crochet and Paul Skeens. Neither of them are on tonight's main slate. So Sale does come in with the highest strikeout percentage, allowed like half of a home run per 9 innings. Zach Wheeler's strikeout percentage a little bit lower, but still very, very good at 29.1%, 3.22 xFIP. There are strikeouts to be had here. Obviously, both of these offenses are dangerous, but they're both just such good pitchers as well that you're not going to be overly concerned about that. So either of these pitchers look good. Again, I'm at this point just kind of throwing out the lineup build that I did before the show because either I got a lot of shitty lineups or I messed something up. And either way, I wouldn't recommend playing shitty lineups or messing up. So going to just throw that out. But Sale and Wheeler both obviously look like good plays. They project well. If we look at them in the context of our pitching projections overall, you can see here we have a slight edge to Wheeler over Sale. He is $1,200 more expensive. If you look at all the pitching, they are the top two projected pitchers on the slate. Wheeler coming in at number 1, Sale at number 2. Point per dollar wise, even though they're expensive, they're both good. Sale coming in as the 5th best point per dollar play. Wheeler coming in 9th, which when you're talking about pitchers, they're 9,300 and 10.5. That is still very, very good since they have the most raw points as well. They both look like very obvious plays. And then hitting wise, nothing's really going to stand out. You do have stolen base upside for Philadelphia here. Obviously, Trey Turner runs a lot. Rojas, Stott, these guys all project pretty well in terms of stolen bases, but the hitting matchup obviously is absolutely awful. Trey Turner has the highest projection in the game. He's 5,200. He only projects for like 8 fantasy points. Michael Harris at 8. Clearly, there is going to be some negative correlation if you want to go to either of these stacks as far as the pitchers are popular and both of these offenses are talented. So there is just raw upside where, if the Phillies have a good game or if Atlanta has a good game, it's likely to be very good because of the amount of power and speed that they have in their lineup. But obviously, low probability of success when you're talking about facing Wheeler or Sale. Umpire said, do you play prize picks, etc.? No, I can't in Maryland. We have legal sports betting, which the trade-off to that was Underdog, Prize Picks, all of those sites getting kicked out of the state. So don't have those. We had Pick 6 on DraftKings for, I think, 4 days before they said we couldn't do that either. So yeah, we lost those, but we have the actual betting sites. So not much offense in this one. Actually curious just to see if the shitty lineups I made were getting to offenses here. And no, not really. Like even in what appear to be very contrarian lineups that I built, getting to like 10% Trey Turner, 8% Real Muto, nothing offensively that looked like a priority. Texas going into Wrigley, where the weather can't really be worse than it was yesterday, I don't think. I know a lot of these games do still have cold temperatures today, but yesterday was especially bad in Wrigley. Looks like the temps are still in the 30s, though. Wind blowing across the field instead of in, so that's an upgrade from yesterday. And that is reflected in the total here, like a 4.5 implied run total for the Cubs, right around 4 for Texas. Yesterday it was like 3.5 for both teams. For the Cubs, you have Jamison Taillon. For the Rangers, you somehow have Patrick Corbin still pitching in Major League Baseball. Somebody other than that is paying this guy money to throw baseballs for their professional baseball team, which is absolutely mind-blowing, but is what it is. I don't recommend getting the Corbin. He's not getting any ownership. I somehow have 6%, but again, we can get rid of that. Jamison Taillon does look like a good point per dollar play here. He's only $6,200, and that's just a little cheap for his talent level. He's not a great pitcher by any stretch of the imagination, not a great strikeout pitcher or anything like that. Only an 18.4% K percentage since the start of last year, but 4.17 xFIP is fine when you're talking about a $6,200 pitcher. Only a 5% walk percentage is pretty nice. You can see here that, we have him projected to face 23 to 24 batters, which is good for that price tag. Have him projected to work relatively deep into the game because, again, he's not a bad pitcher as far as preventing runs. He's not great, but he's not bad. But he doesn't walk a lot of guys. He doesn't strike a lot of guys out. That does get you more outs typically, which obviously does help you project for more fantasy points. The reason that you generally don't love pitchers like this in DFS is that it does kind of increase the volatility that you're dealing with, because if he does just put a couple guys on base and then get unlucky and, give up a single that scores 2 runs, or, a couple back-to-back hits that score 3 runs, it's very, very difficult for him to make up for that since he doesn't have good strikeout stuff. Whereas if you take somebody like Hunter Green yesterday, he can get unlucky in an inning, give up 3 earned runs, and then still go strike out 8, 9 guys, and you're fine. Jameson Taillon, if he gives up 3, 4 runs, you're pretty much screwed. At that point, you're just hoping he gives you like a good point per dollar score, and expensive hitters go nuts because he's not doing anything in terms of like actual raw points. He just doesn't have the strikeout ability, but he's still somebody that on average is going to work relatively deep into the game because of his ability to be efficient, not walk a lot of guys, not get a lot of strikeouts. It does increase the number of outs that you're projecting him for. And so he does actually look like a good point per dollar projection. He's getting 8% ownership. Again, you're not going to be super confident in him. I don't recommend going out of your way to get Jameson Taillon into lineups, but I do think that if you are getting to more expensive bats, if you're trying to get expensive bats plus Sale or expensive bats plus Wheeler, something like that, and you do need to pay down for an SP2, he does project as one of the better cheap SP2 options, even though he is far from exciting. As far as bats go here, on the Texas side, going up against Taillon, generally, and I can't find the tab that I'm looking for. There it is. Generally, throughout his career, Taillon has struggled much more with left-handed bats than right-handed bats. Going back to the start of last season, 172 expected ISO to lefties, 159 to righties. If you go back to the start of 2023, 217 expected ISO to lefties, 151 to righties. So he did do a little bit better job last year of limiting damage, but still somebody that left-handed power bats can get to. Again, we don't have good hitting conditions here, so that plays, in his favor as well. But Corey Seager, solid spot for him. Jock Peterson, those two would be the ones that I would want to single out here as far as, looking good. We do also have pretty good stolen base projection on Wyatt Langford. So we have Langford actually tied with Seager as the highest projection here. Stolen bases driving that a bit. Jock Peterson, as far as home runs go, you can see a little bit higher than Semien, right in line with Wyatt Langford and Garcia, behind the Corey Seager. So from a split standpoint, I think Seager and Peterson are the guys you want. Langford, again, gives you power and stolen base upside at 4,200. Secondary stack, I think, they are in an okay matchup, but the hitting conditions are not great. On the other side, I expect Texas to be, or the Cubs rather, to be pretty popular because Patrick Corbin is really bad, but they're actually not projected for much ownership. I thought you would kind of see people flocking there more than they are. Corbin, I've said it in the past, maybe not as bad as the DFS community makes him out to be, but pretty bad. Like one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball. 190 expected ISO to righties last year, 17% strikeout percentage against them, 16% strikeout percentage against righties with a 204 expected ISO going back to the start of last season. The weather, again, does limit hitters here, but if you can get to the Cubs, I still think they obviously look good against Corbin. Kyle Tucker, lefty. I'm not concerned about that. He hits left-handed pitching well. He's a great hitter overall. He is obviously expensive, but if you can find the salary, he's not projected for a ton of ownership, so that's fine. Seiya Suzuki with the platoon advantage, I like quite a bit. And then if you get, some Happ, Horner, Swanson, any of the rest of these guys, I think they're fine. But goes without saying, as usual, Tucker and Suzuki would be the guys that look the best. Nico Horner drawing a little bit of ownership as well because of the combination of a $4,500 price tag and relatively weak second base position. So this is a game where offensively, I think you would see a lot more ownership coming in here if this game were being played either in Texas or even, in Wrigley in like June when the weather is not freezing. But the weather is kind of keeping the total down here at least a little bit. I mentioned the total being higher, significantly higher today than it was yesterday. You also had Justin Steele facing Nathan Eovaldi yesterday, as opposed to Jameson Taillon facing Patrick Corbin. To have an implied run total below 5 against Patrick Corbin is in 2025 is pretty indicative of how shitty this weather is for hitting still. Not that means you can't score runs. Obviously the Cubs scored, I think, 7 or 8 yesterday in a much more difficult matchup. Minnesota taking on the Royals in Kansas City. 2 more good pitchers going in this one, with Cole Reagans facing off against Pablo Lopez. Good park for offense overall. Not a good park for hitting home runs. Not a good park for getting strikeouts either. Keep forgetting I need to switch back to this screen and pull this game up. But both pitchers are good. Reagan's projected for 28.5% ownership here. Lopez only projected for 6%. I actually, in the very questionable lineups I made before the show, was getting to Reagan's. I love the $8,100 salary here. It just does not make a lot of sense to me. Again, like I said, this park is good for scoring runs. It's bad for getting strikeouts. But Cole Reagans pitches his home games here. When you talk about Cole Reagans overall, since the start of last season, having a 29% strikeout percentage, 3.44 xFIP, 20.5% K minus BB percentage, the fact that he pitches in Kauffman Stadium is baked into his stats, obviously, and his salary. This is just a really cheap price tag for a really good left-handed pitcher. Very, very good changeup. One of the best changeups in baseball. Helps to mitigate right-handed bats. The lineup that Minnesota is running out there is right-handed heavy. Only 2 lefties in it, with Trevor Larnach hitting 3rd and Edward Julian hitting 7th. So that actually sets up nicely for Reagans, who I think I talked about it on a show the other day. People bring up reverse splits a lot when they find them, and sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes it's not. One of the easiest ways to determine if you should buy into them when you're talking about pitching is to look at what the pitcher throws and kind of just have an idea in your head of pitches that generally tend to play better against opposite-handed hitters, and then pitches that tend to play better against same-handed hitters. And if you find somebody with reverse splits that has an elite changeup, or to a lesser extent, an elite curveball, it's probably, and even more so if they don't have like a really good slider, it's likely that the reverse splits are real. And in the case of Cole Reagans, this is somebody that has an absolutely elite changeup. And then you look at his splits since the start of last season, only a 20.9% strikeout percentage against left-handed hitters compared to a 31.8% K percentage against righties. Not a lot of power allowed to either side. 107 expected ISO to lefties, 126 to righties. It's not that lefties do a lot of damage against him, but his strikeout numbers are much, much better against righties. He throws his changeup 28% of the time. It has nearly a 28% swinging strike percentage, 254 expected WOBA allowed against that pitch. Just really, really good against right-handed hitters. And you're getting this Twins lineup that is just running 7 of them out there for who knows what reason, other than, like, obviously a lot of their best hitters are right-handed, but the fact that you're running the bottom of the order out here with like Harrison Bader doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, even though, like I said, lefties don't hit him well either. They just strike out less. On the other side, for Pablo Lopez, he is a good pitcher. He is only getting 6% ownership, 25% strikeout percentage, 3.39 xFIP since the start of last season. I think if you want to look to him as a contrarian play at low ownership, that's fine. But you can see here, not a really flattering projection on him. That's pretty close to where we have Jameson Taillon projected, and there's an $1,800 price difference. Not the best matchup here. Not a good park for getting strikeouts. On a lot of slates, I think if you had an $8,000 Pablo Lopez, you would be pretty interested, especially if he's 6% owned. But on this slate, you just have so many ways you can go with pitching, where you have Reagans on the other side of this game at basically the same salary. You have Wheeler and Sale in that tier above. You have Taillon as a similarly projected play for a lot less. And we're only on the 4th game of the slate. There's more pitching to come as well. It just makes Lopez not really look like much of a priority. Offensively, I don't think that either offense is really a priority in this one either. The Royals fall into the bucket of, they're an offense that has plenty of upside. Any offense that has Bobby Witt covering the shortstop position for you is going to be a team that you can stack and have a ceiling, because he's covering one of your weaker positions and he's giving you a ton of upside. Projects for like 0.2 stolen bases, projects for 0.16 home runs, one of the higher fantasy point projections on the slate, despite having a difficult matchup against Pablo Lopez. But it's just difficult to single this team out as a really good stack when they're facing a pitcher in Lopez that allowed a 152 expected ISO to lefties last year, 149 to righties, 28% K percentage against righties. If you go to Kansas City, it is just the fact that they do have a lot of talent in their lineup. There is some stolen base upside outside of Witt. You can see a decent chance for Michael Garcia to get a stolen base as well. Jonathan India runs a little bit, but Witt obviously leading the way in terms of stolen base upside. There is some home run upside here as well with India, Pasquantino, Perez, Massey, all looking pretty decent there. MJ Melendez, not bad either. But overall, just not a good matchup there. And then on the other side, an even more difficult matchup going up against Regans. Byron Buxton projects okay at 4,500, but nothing that really stands out from the Minnesota side. If I had to pick an offense to get to, it would be KC. But to me, the biggest and I think only priority from this game is Cole Regans. Catching up on chat. Sale should shove. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of status quo for Sale. Haven't looked at FanDuel yet, so can't tell you. I could actually flip over quickly and see how we have pitching projected on FanDuel. Let me get all the games. Yeah, so I mean, FanDuel's looking pretty similar. Wheeler, we haven't gotten to Peralta yet in cores, but at 9K, he looks good. Wheeler, Peralta, Sale, Cease, Regans. Then you get to Boz as well. From a value standpoint, Peralta, Regans, Sale, Landon Rupp, Tyon, Wheeler. So pretty similar. Nothing that stands out on FanDuel as far as being like markedly different than DraftKings, I don't think. The biggest difference is that Tyon is $2,100 more expensive, which again, just I think reinforces how cheap he is on DraftKings. Moving on to, I guess catching up on the rest of the chat first. Horner, Happ, Suzuki, all good BVP against Corbin. Yeah, I mean, BVP is what it is. I don't really care about it, but Corbin is also kind of an example. Like, if you have good BVP against him, sure, who cares? If you were to say somebody had bad BVP against Corbin, it would really reinforce why BVP isn't generally a big deal, because like Patrick Corbin used to be a good pitcher and then he fell off the face of the earth and now he's a horrible pitcher. So somebody could have bad BVP against him because they faced him, 6 years ago when he was like a borderline 1-2. And then now he's like a borderline, 12. So that's kind of, even though it's not applicable to what you said about Horner, Happ, and Suzuki, just a reminder to be careful with BVP, because pitchers, even if you're not talking as big a drop off as you've gotten from Corbin, previous Corbin to now, like especially in this age of analytics in baseball where pitchers are constantly tweaking stuff start to start, month to month, season to season, the guy that you hit really well a year ago or 2 years ago could just be a completely different pitcher as far as what he throws, arm slot, any type of stuff, spin now than he was. So you always want to be careful with that. But at the same time, the way I kind of view it is, if I kind of like the Cubs anyway, and then you tell me like, oh yeah, these guys have had success against them, I'm obviously not going to like them any less at the very least. Josh said he got fourth in the $4 last night for 1,500 with one lineup. That's awesome. Congrats on that. He said Steele plus Green, A's, Padres. Yeah, that'll get it done. Assuming you had Soderstrom with those A's, that helped out quite a bit. Texas lineup is out. Semien, Seager, Langford, Peterson, Garcia, Smith, Young, Heim, and Taveras. I think that's what we had projected. Yeah, I had plenty of Eovaldi. I did not have Steele last night, so I got the exact opposite result of what I wanted in that game. On a side note, I had no idea it was possible for both Logan Webb and Justin Steele to get more strikeouts than Hunter Green, while Hunter Green still ends up being the highest scorer on the slate. Like, I had no idea those three things could all happen at the same time. Moving on to Milwaukee taking on Colorado. In Colorado, Freddie Peralta, good pitcher. Rockies, god-awful team. For the Rockies, you have Kyle Freeland on the mound. I sure hope I don't have interest in either pitcher here, or in Freeland rather. And yeah, again, I'm getting to Freeland in those lineups that I built because he's not getting any ownership, but I don't actually want Kyle Freeland. I don't recommend playing Kyle Freeland. He is 5K. So, I mean, from a value standpoint, sure. If you have some ridiculous lineup where you just have like every hitter that you could possibly want, and then you have Wheeler, Sale, Peralta, whoever, and you only have 5K left, yeah, sure, click on Kyle Freeland and just do not watch the game. Look back in the morning and see how bad he did. But any starting pitcher that is fully stretched out, if they're $5,000, I don't care if they're pitching on the moon, they are technically underpriced. The issue is still that you're not you're not trying to make like optimal lineups in baseball because it'll never happen, but it's the way that like the scoring works, right? Like 5K at pitcher, yeah, he's underpriced, but with 20 offenses going, it's basically a guarantee that plenty of, $3,000 hitters or something are going to score 15, 16, 18, 20 points. And it's going to be irrelevant that your $5,000 pitcher got 2.5x while your $8,000 pitcher got 2.2x. You're going to just want those raw points because point per dollar value is generally going to be made up with your bats. So Freeland is absolutely underpriced. Any 5K pitcher that is fully stretched out, not limited, is underpriced. And he could go get 25 points. Like, it's possible, I guess. But not somebody I actually would really want to be getting to. And again, I assume I just screwed something up in what I ran before the show. Peralta on the other side, though, I am happy to get to. Obviously, pitching in Coors Field sucks. Your ability to get strikeouts goes down because the ball doesn't move as well. Your batting average on balls in play allowed goes up because the outfield is massive and guys just have to cover so much ground. Like, that's the real reason that Coors Field is such a hitter-friendly park, especially with the humidor now. It's not so much the home runs, although it is still a good place to hit home runs. Like, the outfield is massive. They have elevated walls now. They have the humidor, so it's not like it was when it first opened and anybody could hit a home run there. But it's just that because the outfield is so big to offset the altitude, you have so much ground to cover, and balls in play just end up falling in, singles turn into doubles turn into triples, etc. So all of that sucks and it makes things difficult. But the thing that really stands out, and I want to call attention to with Peralta, outside of the fact that he's just good, is Freddie Peralta is like a $9,000 or $9,500 pitcher when you just talk about baseline talent level. So when you see Freddie Peralta projected, or priced rather, at $7,800, you don't want to just, when you're thinking about who to play, you don't want to say, oh, Freddie Peralta's in Coors Field, I'm not going to play him, or I can't play him, because you're getting that $1,200 discount, give or take, off of where he actually would be priced in a neutral park. So it's accounting for Coors Field. And now you're just back to being like, okay, Freddie Peralta is, correctly priced, or Freddie Peralta is a little underpriced, or whatever it may be. The matchup obviously still gives you upside against the Rockies. They are still really, really bad. Freddie Peralta, you can see here, we have projected for one of the highest raw totals amongst pitchers today. We have him third behind Wheeler and Sale, just ahead of Reagans. You could obviously quibble if you want and, move Reagans ahead of him, move Cease ahead of him if you want, decent strikeout matchup for him. Any of these guys, I talked about it yesterday, like 1.5 fantasy point projection when you factor in volatility is not a lot at all. Any of these guys are live to beat the other ones, but whether you want to say Peralta is third, like we have him, whether you want to say he's, seventh behind Baz, it doesn't matter. He looked good at $7,800. You're talking about the difference of like a point and a half. So I do like him. He's getting 20% ownership. I think that's perfectly fine. In my god-awful lineups that I built, I would have more, but again, real grain of salt on that one. Offensively, obviously, if you want to get to bats, particularly from the Milwaukee side, I think that's fine. William Contreras getting the most ownership at 20%. Chorio, Mitchell, Yelich, Capra, Ortiz, Frelick, Hoskins, all getting double-digit ownership here. The one thing that you will want to be careful of, these ownership numbers are not crazy high. It is a 10-game slate. They're all, 20% or less. None of them are super alarming. But you do want to keep in mind, baseball, because of stacking, because of correlation, is a little bit different than a sport like basketball or even NFL, where your stacks are smaller. If you 5-man stack the Brewers on DraftKings, 50% of your lineup, by definition here, is getting double-digit ownership. And then on top of that, it's not just that they are individually double-digit ownership. It's that from a combinatorial standpoint, they're being played together a ton. So your lineups are going to overlap pretty heavily with a relatively large portion of the field. But the nice thing is, on a 10-game slate, not only are the raw ownership numbers, not too crazy at 10 to 20%, but you do also have plenty of other spots you can get to where you have very low owned plays, whether that is going to, in this case, not Kyle Freeland since he's facing them, but, going to Jamison Taillon, going to Kyle Hendricks, at 1% owned, or just going to a low-owned secondary stack, low-owned high upside one-offs, whatever it may be. There's still going to be options here on a 10-game slate to offset that ownership. But you do just want to keep that in mind that, in a sport like basketball, you really are more concerned just thinking about individual ownership, because teammates, there will be some combinatorial overlap. If you have a cheap center, if the best point per dollar play on the slate's a center and the highest projected guy is a point guard, they're going to be paired together a lot. You have that kind of stuff, but you don't have everybody just saying, oh yeah, I'm going to play 5 guys from the Nets today. And now they're all owned together all the time, like you do in baseball. So do keep that in mind, that it does kind of just change up the way you need to be thinking about your lineups a little bit. But it is a good spot here for Milwaukee. They get the park upgrade going into Coors. Kyle Freeland, since the start of last season against right-handed hitters, 196 ISO allowed, 193 expected ISO, only a 17.5% strikeout percentage. He actually allowed power to lefties last year more than usual as well. 189 expected ISO, only an 18% strikeout percentage. So any part of this lineup, I think looks good. No issues with getting to anything here. Christian Yelich, Garrett Mitchell maybe lose a little bit of ownership compared to where they would be against a right-handed pitcher because of the lefty-lefty matchup. Chourio, looks really good. Contreras looks really good. So the Brewers, clearly good to get to. Colorado on the other side, not as appealing because they just don't have the same level of quality hitters that Milwaukee does. The strongest argument, I think, for Colorado would be just that Peralta is probably going to get 20% ownership, and he is still pitching in Coors Field. So you're getting the lower owned team in Coors, which, obviously is a good hitter's park. But you also are in this situation where, with it being a 10-game slate, negative correlation against the pitcher isn't quite as strong. It still exists. It's still useful. It's not quite as strong as on smaller slates because the gap is just wider. The window is wider for Peralta to have a mediocre start without the Rockies actually being a slate winning team. Rockies score 5-6 runs against Peralta. He's dead. You don't want him. But outside of maybe like an individual hitter that has a big game, you probably don't need the full Rocky stack in that case either, because there's 19 other teams and some of them are going to score 9, 10, 11 runs today. So, you don't get a huge bump, I don't think, on a 10-game slate from Peralta being 20% owned. So clearly do prefer the Milwaukee side here. Before we move on to Houston and Seattle, in case you are just oblivious to the screen change or can't put 2 and 2 together, projections are available now. They are up for sale on runthesims.com. Link is in the description below. Check those out. We had been using Utah's manual projections for the first week or so while we finished up our model behind the scenes, but that is done now. We released it yesterday. Really excited about having these to use. We've put all the most recent data that we can get our hands on into this model. Really happy with the way it looks so far. Obviously still, paying attention to it and looking to improve it as time goes on. But really excited to be playing with this, have this available. So check that out. Link is in the description below. Houston taking on Seattle. In Seattle, terrible park to hit in. Obviously, neither of these teams with an implied run total above 4. Do not know who is pitching for Houston. It is scheduled to be Framber Valdez, but he is, I don't remember exactly what the issue is. I think sick and hurt, maybe. Astros general manager Dana Brown said Sunday that Valdez is dealing with some fatigue and a sore throat, putting his status in question for his scheduled turn through the rotation Tuesday. We have not gotten any sort of confirmation on if he is pitching, at least that I've seen, if he is pitching or who would be pitching if he is not. The only confirmed pitching news I've seen out of Houston lately is that Spencer Arrighetti is hurt. So still waiting on that. Definitely something to keep an eye on. If Framber Valdez is pitching, then it's a tough spot for Seattle. He's a good pitcher, not a great strikeout pitcher, but a good pitcher, overall. He's projected for 16% ownership right now, but again, completely up in the air whether or not he even ends up pitching. On the other side, you have Luis Castillo getting 15% ownership. He, I think, is fine. The matchup's not ideal against Houston, but the park is really good. The price tag at 8,500 is fine. 16.5 fantasy point projection. If you look in terms of points per dollar, I think he's kind of middle of the pack, or like 8th, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7th. 7th in points per dollar, 7th in raw points. So, you combine those and he just looks like a pretty solid option. Projects for like 5.5 strikeouts here, projects for nearly 6 innings. So just a good pitcher in a good park against an okay, but not nearly as good as it was last year offense. No Kyle Tucker, no Alex Bregman anymore. Paredes is fine, but he's not Alex Bregman, especially in this park. Christian Walker is good, but he's not Kyle Tucker. So, the bottom of this lineup is not particularly good at all. So decent spot for Castillo. No problems with getting to him. I think he just looks like a solid play. I think that 15% or so ownership looks completely warranted. Offensively, I wouldn't expect to be getting tons of either team. the strongest case I think I could make is that, the top of the lineup, at least for Houston, is pretty talented, and you are going to get low ownership on somebody like Yordan Alvarez, who just has a ton of power, clearly is still capable of hitting it out in T-Mobile Park, even though it's a really tough place to hit. But outside of the ownership considerations, I think it's very difficult to love getting to the Astros bats. Castillo, going back to last season, has had some, or not even going back to last season, going back a couple years, has had some home run issues, particularly to lefties. 206 expected ISO allowed to lefties since the start of 2023, 199 since the start of last season. Also only struck lefties out 19.5% last season. So, again, going back to somebody like Yordan Alvarez in particular, 5,600, not going to get much ownership, really, really good hitter. Does actually have a kind of favorable matchup here when you look at what Castillo struggles with and what obviously Alvarez is really good at. I think he's a great one-off. He's somebody that I think, going back to talking about like those Milwaukee lineups where maybe you're stacking Milwaukee and you're lumping these 15, 20% owned guys together, finding a way to get to a 5% owned Alvarez, you're still going to have a ton of upside. It's going to save some ownership. If you play him over a Milwaukee outfielder, that's a way you can differentiate as well. Devin Scott kind of alluded to it there. I don't know if he meant in Milwaukee stacks, but I'm not saying like you just shouldn't play Chirinos in Milwaukee stacks or Chirinos rather in Milwaukee stacks or anything like that. But one way you can offset that whole, or help offset the whole combinatorial ownership thing is, well, I'm going to play 5 Brewers, but I'm going to play Yordan Alvarez instead of Chirinos, the highest owned outfielder, or I'm going to play Yainer Diaz just because he happens to be in front of my face instead of William Contreras. Like, going that route, it lowers your projection a bit because you're taking one of the best hitters of your stack out, but you're maintaining that ceiling by going to a low-owned pivot away from them. It's not the best way to make those stacks, but it is one way that you can help offset the combinatorial ownership there. On the other side for Seattle, again, it depends who's pitching. I don't know who the alternative to Framber Valdez even is. If it is Framber Valdez, I'm not particularly interested. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but he is very good overall. Limits power, 115 expected ISO to righties, sub 100 expected ISO to lefties. Strikes lefties out at a pretty high clip, about 23% to righties. Park sucks for hitting. So it's a lot easier, I think, to make a case for Houston bats here and there than it is for Seattle. Again, I don't know who would be going for Houston. Obviously, it can change to some extent. Like, whoever, if Valdez ends up not pitching, whoever replaces him is probably not as good as him, but it's also probably not going to be a situation where suddenly Seattle looks great because they are still playing in this park. Baltimore taking on Arizona. In Arizona, Charlie Morton is pitching for the Orioles. Decent outing from them last night against Zach Gallen. Merrill Kelly is going for Arizona. Both of these guys have struggled so far this season. Both of them will probably be perfectly fine over a larger sample. We have a pretty long track record of what both of these guys are. I don't think either of them are going to look great from a fantasy standpoint. 13-point projection for Morton at 6,700, about a 10-point projection for Kelly at 7K. I don't anticipate getting to a ton of either one. I do think I would go to Charlie Morton first, probably, just because he is a little bit cheaper. We have him projected a little bit higher in terms of strikeouts and in terms of fantasy points, but neither one looks like any sort of a priority here. Offensively, both of these offenses do have plenty of upside. Kelly going up against a lineup that just has a lot of power here in Baltimore. Since the start of last season, Kelly has allowed a 267 expected ISO to lefties, only 193 since the start of 2023, still relatively high. But the other thing that really stands out there is that he only struck out 13% of lefties last year, 21% going back to 2023. If you compare that to his numbers against righties, he had a 27% strikeout percentage since 2023, 26% since last year. This is a dangerous Baltimore lineup. We don't have the official lineup yet, but Henderson, Rutschman, O'Hearn from the left side. Kjerstad has power. Cedric Mullins is healthy and hitting the ball extremely well to start the year. Jackson Holliday seems like maybe, he's starting to live up to his prospect status. There's a lot of talented left-handed bats in this lineup. And then obviously, even though they don't have the platoon advantage, guys like Jordan Westberg, Tyler O'Neill, Ryan Mountcastle still give you plenty of upside. But you just have such good left-handed hitters here that I do think that stands out a bit against a pitcher in Kelly that isn't good at getting swings and misses against them, gives up a lot of power to them. I think that is pretty appealing. Arizona's bullpen, I'm pulling up right now. They have 3 left-handed pitchers in their bullpen. One of them is AJ Puck, who is essentially their closer, but two of them are middle relief guys, Joe Mantiply and Jalen Beeks. Beeks threw 35 pitches on Sunday, didn't pitch yesterday, may or may not be available today. I think they would probably prefer to give him today, but I wouldn't rule him out. Mantiply pitched on Saturday and Sunday, 13 pitches apiece. Didn't pitch yesterday. I would assume he's available today. So they do have some matchup ability throughout the game. But maybe like if Beeks isn't available, then because you have Puck essentially as your closer or setup guy at best, the matchup ability isn't great. But they do have left-handed relievers in their bullpen, at least one available, or at least two available, probably three, decent chance for three. So that does knock down Orioles' interest a little bit, but you can see from a projection standpoint, Gunnar looks really good. Westberg looks good. We actually have Mullins looking really good here as well. Stolen base upside for Mullins is very high. They will look to run with him. Jackson Holliday, just as an aside here, they are looking to run with him overall this year. That was a huge emphasis in spring training. So not saying that makes Holliday look like a great player or anything like that, but that is something just to keep in mind in general, that not only are we probably hopefully going to see a more productive Jackson Holliday this year than we did last year offensively, but he does most likely offer more stolen base upside this year than he has in the past as well. On the other side for Arizona, not as high projections for them, but Corbin Carroll in particular does look good. A lot of stolen base upside there. Some stolen base upside for Josh Naylor, who's been running despite looking like somebody who would not be running. Perdomo has stolen base upside too. So there's some stolen base upside here for Arizona, which is nice against Charlie Morton. Corbin Carroll clearly would be the guy that you would want to get to first. Perdomo gives you some value as a $3,800 shortstop hitting second in that lineup. But I do prefer the Baltimore side slightly from a stacking standpoint. I do wish Arizona had fewer lefties in their bullpen though. Cincinnati going into San Francisco, which is not a good spot to be in offensively. Landon Rupp on the mound for the Giants. Nick Lodolo going for the Reds. Lodolo not getting any ownership. Rupp getting like 10%. A little surprised there's not more coming into Lodolo just because he is a good strikeout pitcher. But, you can see here. Whoops. Did not want to do that. You could see there, before I clicked the wrong button, that for his salary, we don't really have Lodolo projected all that well. I don't think other places in the industry do either. So that is keeping his ownership down. Rupp is only 7,300, so he is a decent point per dollar play. He actually projects pretty similarly. Has a decent matchup here against Cincinnati. There are strikeouts to be had in this lineup. Matt McLain may or may not be playing. He's missed the last 4 games with a hamstring injury. They said yesterday that he was available to pinch hit, so hopefully that means that he's close to returning. But if he's out of the lineup, that will make it a little bit easier for Landon Rupp. Jake Fraley was a late scratch yesterday as well. So potentially you end up getting a Reds lineup that doesn't have McLain, doesn't have Fraley, and it looks much better than their current projected lineup. But either way, neither of these pitchers are priorities. I think that Landon Rupp as a value play, SP2, is okay if you need to go there. Offensively, nothing that really stands out from the Giants side. Again, I think Lodolo is a pretty solid pitcher overall. This is obviously a big park upgrade for him as well. Righties only had a 144 expected ISO against him last year, struck out 23% of the time. Lefties did absolutely nothing against him. 269 expected WOBA, sub 100 expected ISO. Don't anticipate getting to too much of the Giants. That being said, like Ramos, Adames, Chapman, certainly a high upside 3-man. You can throw Wilmer Flores in there for cheap if you wanted to. There is talent, but tough matchup against Lodolo. They don't project all that well. On the other side, De La Cruz very clearly standing out as the anomaly in this Cincinnati offense. None of them project well. And then you have De La Cruz just by himself. 0.44 projected stolen bases is, I think, by far the highest we've seen as I've gone through this show. 0.15 home runs is, relatively a lot. Very good projection on him. Like him as, a one-off. The upside is obviously very, very high. He's not getting much ownership again today, only projected for like 4%. Didn't work out yesterday, but very, very, very strongly believe that if you just blindly play Ellie De La Cruz every time he's 5% owned, you probably come out ahead on that play throughout the course of a season if you don't even look at the matchup or anything like that, just because of how much overall upside he has. So I do think he's a good individual tournament play, but I don't like the Cincinnati bats overall outside of him since last season, which I think was his first season. 509 pitches thrown to righties, 481 thrown to lefties last year. Only a 16% K percentage against lefties for Landon Rupp. He did not allow power, sub 100 expected ISO, 324 expected WOBA. Righties had a 110 expected ISO, 286 expected WOBA. He did have a 28.8% K percentage against righties. So you did see a very, very drastic split as far as his ability to get strikeouts against same-handed hitters versus left-handed hitters. So that will be something to pay attention to once we get an actual Reds lineup as well, is exactly how many righties are in this lineup, because the more righties, the more strikeouts. It's not a matter of if there's lefties, the Reds suddenly look good. It's just the more righties there are, the more strikeouts that you can project for Landon Rupp. And finally, wrapping things up here with San Diego taking on the A's in Sacramento. A's came through in a big way yesterday. Tyler Soderstrom, 2 home runs. I think tied with Aaron Judge for major league lead right now, which is worth absolutely nothing, but still interesting. Pitching wise, we have Dylan Cease going for the Padres, Jeffrey Springs going for the A's. Springs getting no ownership, Cease getting like 14%, as has been the case throughout this whole show. I have the inverse of that, but that should be changing. If you get to Cease, great. I think on a lot of slates, he would be a priority in this spot, taking on the A's. But on this slate, I think more of a secondary option. Again, reminder that this game is not in Oakland, so this is not the same great park for pitching that it used to be. Cease does still project well here, but he is also expensive at 10,300. We have him projected for just over 6 strikeouts. We have him projected to go 5.5, 6 innings, almost 6 innings. 2.4 earned runs. Like, that all looks good. Springs is 7,500. More difficult strikeout matchup against the Padres, and that's what's really hurting him here. He is a solid pitcher. He's not, somebody I love taking hitters against generally, but the Padres are not only a dangerous offense, a good offense, they are also tough to strike out. So that's why you're seeing the low strikeout or low fantasy projection for Jeffrey Springs. He's somebody that I'm sure we're going to be playing plenty of over the course of the season, just probably not tonight. But getting to Dylan Cease, I think, does look good. Again, in the context of all pitchers today, we have him projected like 6th, but again, these guys are kind of like all interchangeable. Decent point per dollar play as well. So I think just a secondary option in the context of this slate, because Wheeler, Peralta, Sale are going to look better. It looks like we just got an update during the show that now has Framber Valdez in. So I guess I kind of had glossed over him a little bit, but since we have him projected so well, if he's pitching, pretty clearly going to like $8,800 Framber Valdez. If he's not pitching, then obviously won't. I don't really know how to handle the question mark about his status here. Like, on the one hand, if he does pitch, you assume he's feeling okay. But on the other hand, if he was dealing with fatigue and a sore throat, what happens if in the 3rd inning, he's just like, oh man, I feel like shit. I thought it was okay. I'm not. Like, there is obviously just going to be some added volatility there where even if the leash isn't necessarily shorter, and it could be, you do obviously just have some added risk of not feeling good halfway through the game. So that's something where, maybe I would manually knock that down a little bit just to account for that volatility. But as you can see here, we do think it's a very good matchup for him. Both the park is, park obviously is really good. The matchup itself is good. So projection wise, really like Framber Valdez if he does pitch, but I would, again, be a little more cautious with that than the actual projection number, just because we don't have, as far as I know, at least a check mark in our projection system for whether or not somebody is sick. So you can manually, account for that on your own. Now wrapping things up, getting back to the bats in the Padres and Athletics game. Again, 2 solid pitchers here. I would prefer getting to the Padres side. They just clearly have a lot of talent. One thing to keep in mind with Jeffrey Springs, he does have a good changeup. He is another one of these left-handed pitchers that actually has a higher strikeout percentage against righties than lefties. Last season struck out 27.5% of righties compared to 23% of lefties. 140 expected ISO to righties, 320 expected WOBA. So that's not to say you can't play Tatis, you can't play Machado. Obviously, they're very good right-handed hitters, but it's not an ideal matchup for them, even though they're facing a left-handed pitcher. One thing I will mention with Tatis, and you can see it reflected in our projections here with 0.22 stolen bases, he has been running a lot to start the season, and he said it's by design. He was dealing with leg injuries last year. It prevented him from running as much as he wanted to. He is out there looking to run this season, and that just makes him look, even better than he would have anyway. So do want to point that out with him. But mostly with San Diego, it's just a function of this offense is good. The matchup's not great, but you can take your chances. They're getting some ownership, though. 17% projected to come into Machado, 12% to Tatis, 12% to Diaz as a punt play at catcher. Good point per dollar value there on him. On Gurriel, good point per dollar value as well, getting 9% ownership. So the Padres do look like one of the more popular stacks here. On the other side for the Athletics, they are not getting as much ownership. Shea Langeliers is leading the way at 4%. I don't see a lot of reason to be getting to them. Cease obviously is a very good pitcher. Since the start of last season, 139 expected ISO to righties with a 32.5% K percentage, 157 expected ISO to lefties, 24.9% K percentage. If you want to hope Tyler Soderstrom stays hot, like he's cheap, he's getting 2% ownership, he has the platoon advantage, he should be hitting in the middle of the order, that's fine. But clearly, I don't think there's anything that you are really prioritizing from the A's. So that wraps this one up. I will now actually remember to make a home run pick since I have easily accessible data right in front of me. So you can see as far as projections go at the top, a lot of names that you would expect. Michael Harris, extremely surprising against Wheeler. I don't really know why or what's driving that. That's interesting. Not going to be my home run pick, but Harris, Olsen showing up as well. So actually a couple of Braves projecting much better as far as home runs go against Wheeler than I would expect. Still not high fantasy projections overall, but goes with, how much power upside, I guess, in that lineup. But as far as home run picks go, I'll just stay at the top of the board. I'll go with Alvarez. Talked about it during that game that I really like that individual matchup. And given that nobody is playing him, I don't think it's too chalky to go to. The park sucks, but other than that, I think it actually all looks good for Yordan Alvarez. Devin Scott said he took Brandon Lau plus 450. That looks pretty good here as well. Definitely like that spot against Kyle Hendricks. So that's all I have for you on this one. Again, sign up, use these projections for yourself. Link is in the description below. Really excited to have these, be working with these throughout the season. Thank you for checking out the show. I'll be back here again tomorrow.